start, I'm going to go ahead and plug in my power supply to test. Our LCD screen should pop up. You should see something like that on your screen. Also, both
this next section we're going to go over wire management, then we're going to go and test the machine also.
And the one on my hot end should also be turning. If not, go through and check your wiring for all of those things. Make sure everything's plugged in correctly. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to test some things on the printer before I do the wire management. So I'm going to go into temperature, nozzle. I'm going to increase the nozzle temperature to something past room temperature, so around 50 degrees. And go back to the main menu. You're going to see my temperature is set on the screen to 51 degrees. The temperature is currently rising, and I do have my finger on the hot end, and I can actually feel that it's heating up. Now that I can tell that it's heating, we can go ahead and shut that off. Go back to control, temperature, nozzle, and set that back to 0. Now I can move down to bed, and I can set that to a temp over room temperature, so kind of the same thing, 40 or 50 degrees. Go back out. I can see my temperature is set. It's currently 21 degrees, and I'm just going to put my hand on the bed to check to see if the temperature is rising. It is going to rise slower than the hot end will rise, but you can see it is heating, and I can feel on the heat bed that it is getting warm. Now I can go back in and I can turn the hot end temperature off. You'll notice there was a fan speed in there. That is not going to control any of our fans because our fans are going to be running 100% of the time. That would be if later on you were to add a print cooler and connect it to your electronics. Now that those items are tested, we can unplug our power supply once our hot end goes back down to room temp. I like to use these zip ties and these wire wraps. They're easy to get on and off until you know everything's correct. Later on you can use that actual wire loom. So to start, I'm going to use these. These are what were used to wrap up some of our wires from the factory before they ship them out. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to gather up all of my wires for the X carriage. So I've got the hot end heater, the hot end thermistor, the hot end fan, the X end stop, and then we're going to zip tie all of those to the PTFE tube as well. If you have anything caught in the middle of them, like I have the extruder motor wrapped around some of the other ones, get those out of the way so that we can do a nice clean wire management job. Now I'm just going to zip tie those wires together that we just did on the X carriage that connect to the Z motor and the extruder motor. Just going to get rid of all of the slack and loop them up on each other before I zip tie them and move on to the next ones. After you've done all this wire management and you've turned the printer on and you've tested it all again, you can use this wire loom and actually put it on those wires to make it look better. It's usually best to wait until your printer is working until you do that. You'll also use some of that wire loom in the end to go back on the hot or the heat bed wires as well. Next thing we're going to do is the wire cover, which will go right into the extrusion, and this is what I'm going to use to hide the Y motor and the Y end stop wires. And all you have to do is cut the length that you need to fit in between everything. Go ahead and put the Y motor wire in first, just because it's the widest, and then put the end stop wire in there also, and then go ahead and push it into that channel for your extrusion. Then we're going to cut another piece to go from where the wires are over to the electronics. Do the exact same thing, put the Y motor wire in first, and then the Y end stop wires in next, and then press it into that extrusion. Okay, and then after you have done your first print, you can wrap all those heat bed wires in some of the wire loom included as well. I always wait until after I've printed to make sure I don't have to do anything with the wiring. There's the wire loom you can use on it also. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the wires for the Z end stop, the Y end stop, the Y motor, and any of those other little wires that are just hanging loose over there. I'm going to take the slack out of them, zip tie them together so it's nice and neat. Now that we have all those wires taken care of, we can take that acrylic panel that has the fan on it, and we can install that on top of our electronics using the 4 remaining bolts that came in the bag when we did the electronics section of it. So that will go right over it there. After that, we can go ahead and install this last acrylic L bracket in the upper left corner of your machine. Now you can go ahead, plug your machine in. First thing we're going to do is go into our menu on the LCD, do prepare, and do auto home. This should move your nozzle to the front left corner of your bed. If it's not over that bolt in the corner, you can go ahead and adjust your Y end stop, which is currently pictured. You just loosen those 2 M4 bolts holding the acrylic bracket in place, and you can move that forwards and backwards to make your nozzle stop in the corner of the heat bed where it should. The next end stop we can adjust is our Z end stop, which is currently pictured. You adjust it the same way as the Y end stop, only we raise it up and down. What we want is for our nozzle to be just over the heat bed. When we adjust this properly, you'll also use the springs and the thumb screws in the 4 corners of the heat bed. So once you have your Z end stop set, you can manually move your nozzle to all 4 corners of the bed and adjust those thumb screws until it's the same distance in all 4 corners. A lot of people use just a sheet of paper to get a little bit of drag in between the nozzle and the heat bed.
After that, you're ready to go ahead and test your printer. You can generate some G-code, put it on the SD card, and then print. See how everything goes. If any of the motors go backwards, like the Titan extruder motor will most likely go backwards, you can change that in your firmware and upload the firmware again, or you can unplug your power, reverse the connection of the wires in the motor connector, then plug the motor back in and plug your power back in. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me at makerfarm.com.